Good morning and welcome to Mass Memorial Virtual Sunday School. Theme for the quarter, A Living Faith. Unit 3, What Does Faith Cost? Sunday, November 20th, 2022. The lesson title, Paul Ministers in Malta, Acts 28, 1 through 10. Our key verse, and it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and of a bloody flux, to whom Paul entered in and laid his hands on him and healed him. Acts 28 and 8 from King James Version. The aim for this lesson is to know how Paul helped people on the island of Malta, to appreciate the way others ministers to us, and to minister to those in need. Our lesson background, the book of Acts. We talked about this couple of months ago, what the book of Acts entail, but it's a history and it's a book that contains the history and faith on how the Christian doctrine was spread after the resurrection and ascension of Christ. And the book of Acts is quite detailed on Paul's journey and what happens in his life. The other lesson background is Paul himself, and we know that Paul is one of the best known of all of the apostles, and is given credit for writing approximately 14 of the 27 books in the New Testament. Paul's life journey began as an avid persecutor of Christians to becoming one of God's greatest messenger in spreading the gospel. Another important point in our lesson background is this lesson deals with Paul's fourth missionary voyage. This journey occurred around 58 to 60 AD. Paul was on board a ship to Rome as a prisoner to stand trial for an uprising that had occurred in Jerusalem. Paul was on board along with 276 people that became shipwrecked. Now, for the last two Sundays, Ms. Griffin has covered most of this. Last Sunday's lesson deals with the actual journey, and then the uprising is when he appealed to King Agrippa. And this lesson is actually dealing with the shipwreck and what happened after he became shipwrecked. So this is an important lesson in terms of where Paul started out in Jerusalem with the uprising. Okay, another important, point in our lesson is the word Malta. Malta is a small island in the Mediterranean that was given strategic importance as a naval base. It lies between Sicily and North Africa. And today it still exists and is very densely populated. And it's also believed that this island has been inhabited since 5900 BC. It is a nation that is known for its historic succession of rulers, including the Romans, the Moors, Knights, the British. And this island today has numerous fortresses and temples. And also today, Malta is an independent country, and it is the largest of three islands in a string of waterways around Sicily. The other term that we'll see as we, go along in our lesson is the term barbarians. And as we go on, we see Paul use this term to describe the people on the island of Malta. But it has nothing to do with our definition of barbarians as we know it, which is a negative meaning, which means uncivilized or primitive. In Paul's time, barbarian was a word that was used to refer to anyone who did not speak Greek. And so the people of Malta were of Phoenician ancestry. And they originated, the word barbarian itself originated in ancient Greek. And so Paul used this to describe the people of Malta because they did not speak Greek. Another name that appears in our lesson is Publius. He was considered the ruler of the island of Malta at the time of Paul's shipwreck. And he basically was like the king or the leader or the person in charge, and basically had the last word in terms of what went on the island. The other person in our lesson is Publius' father. Um, Paul healed Publius' father of a dreaded disease called bloody flux, which in our day, but bloody flux is a type of dysentery, a type of gastroenteritis that results in bloody diarrhea. It is an inflammation of the intestines. And today, we know that this disease still can be prevalent, and it's caused by a bacteria or an amoeba called Shigella. And most of the time, it's spread through contaminated food or water. And if you work in the food industry and you come down with Shigella, you have to stop work, and the job has to be notified, and you can't go back until the health department clear you, because it can be a very dangerous disease from an intestinal standpoint. So that's give us some background on some of the terms that we'll come across as we get into our scriptures. Our lesson scriptures begin with Acts. I'm going to do 2 verses initially. Receiving help from strangers, which is covered in Acts 28, 1 through 2. Acts 28, 1. And when they were escaped, then they knew that the island was called Melita, which is another name for Malta. Acts 28, 2. And the barbarous people showed us no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us everyone because of the present rain and because of the cold. So basically, these 2 verses just let us know that the people on the island received Paul well. I mean, when they found they were shipwrecked, some of them washed ashore, they instantly prepared a fire to make them warm and to show their hospitality. And so, if you remember, I think in last Sunday's lesson, many of the people on board the ship, some of the centurions wanted to throw them overboard and get rid of them, but God sent Paul a message that everyone would be saved. So everyone was saved. And so these people were very helpful in showing their hospitality toward Paul and his group. Our next unit is called Divine Protection. Acts 28, 3 through 6. We'll take Acts 28, 3 and 4 first. Acts 28, 3. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hands. Acts 28, 4. And when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he has escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffers not to live. These are 2 interesting verses, because actually what happened to Paul was predicted in the Great Commission. And just to give you an idea of what that is, the Great Commission is found in Mark 6:18. And it says that Jesus spoke of signs of the Great Commission, that they would take up serpents, they would drink anything deadly, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick and they shall recover. So this is an example of the Great Commission to which Jesus was talking about. And in verse 3, we see that Paul didn't just come in and expect the people to just instantly do for him. He helped them to gather wood. You know, oftentimes we think if we're in dire straits that we can't do anything to help ourselves, but Paul did help them gather wood for the fire. And this is where he encountered this viper. I guess we know it as a snake today. And so when the people saw it being very suspicious, they just assumed that they were standing there waiting on Paul to die. because usually if it's a poisonous snake and you don't do anything about it, you have about 10 minutes if you have that long to survive. But nothing happened, so they had formed their own conclusion by saying that well, he escaped the sea, but he didn't escape the wrath or the vengeance of what he was due. And so they had this idea that Paul had done something terribly wrong, but this is not true. And we know that Paul was part of was showing the results of the Great Commission. So Acts 5 and 6, and he shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. Acts 28:6. Howbeit they looked when he should have swollen or fallen down dead suddenly. But after they had looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. This is a god with a small g, because many of the people in the islands were very superstitious. So they thought that he must have been somebody abnormal or somebody interesting, because they waited. As I said, sometimes you have 10 minutes to live, or sometimes much less, depending on which snake it is. So Paul was showing that Paul actually was given divine protection. That's what this Great Commission is. It's divine protection that the apostles would receive as they went out to spread the gospel. Some of the things they would encounter. And so they were protected. And so they stood there waiting, and when nothing happened, they came to another conclusion, that he must be a god. Okay, and our next scriptures, ministering to others. Acts 28:7-10. We'll do Acts 28:7 and 8. Acts 28:7. In the quarters were possessions of the chief man of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and lodged us 3 days courteously. Acts 28:8. And it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and of a bloody flux, to whom Paul entered in and prayed and laid hands on him and healed him. Now, after the chief had been hospitable to Paul, and we can imagine they developed a relationship. So he mentioned that his father was sick of this bloody flux. Back then, we don't know what the treatment was for this disease, but even today is very difficult to treat. And most of the time, if it's serious, you will be hospitalized. And so Paul went in and he looked at Publius' father, prayed with him, and laid hands on him. Here again, result of the Great Commission. And so as Paul laid his hands on him, he was healed. Our next two verses, Acts 28:9 and 10. So when this was done, others also, which had diseases in the island, came and were healed. Acts 28:10. Who also honored us with many honors. When we departed, they laded us with such things as were necessary. These two verses come at the end of Paul's stay on the island. And it lets us know that once the people saw what Paul had done for Publius' father, he did it for others who were sick in the island, and they came and were healed. What this lesson also shows us, that under the circumstances that Paul encountered being shipwrecked, he rose above his circumstances to help someone else, to minister to others. He was in a foreign place, a country he wasn't familiar with, shipwrecked, probably didn't have any idea how he was going to actually get to Rome from here. But he did not let that keep him from being helpful to the islanders. And so what he did, he healed those that were sick. And probably if this bloody flux was running rampant, there were a lot of them with bloody flux, because we don't know what like I said, what their treatment was for this disease during that time. So when finally Paul got ready to leave the island, the people prepared him for his journey. Now, we don't know if they provided him with transportation, but obviously you would have to, because this is an island surrounded by water. And so when Paul departed, the people showed their gratitude for what Paul had done by providing probably food, whatever else they needed for their journey. These scriptures are very short for this lesson, and yet they are very powerful in terms of ministering to others in our own dire circumstances. And from that point, we need to look at what the practical applications are for today. This lesson lets us know that, as well known as Paul was in the ministry, he realized at this point in his life he needed help from someone else. We as believers must learn to receive help during difficult situations. That help can come from anyone at any given time. And we see that Paul didn't refuse these islanders. I mean, he could have said, no, I don't want your help. But he didn't. He realized that they were there for a reason, and that they provided him with what he needed at this particular time. And remember, he thought of them as barbarians. So, that in our day and age, that's already a negative connotation. But remember, that had reference to language back then. And as we have been taught that it's better to give than receive, we also get a blessing from being able to receive. During life's crises and difficulties, anything and everything can help make a situation more bearable. And there's no such thing as a small blessing. Sometimes we need to be appreciative for the small things that happen in life. And sometimes it's hard for us to receive, because we often have the attitude, I've arrived and nobody can help me do anything. I know everything. So this lesson says just the opposite, that Paul, as powerful as he was in the ministry and being an apostle, he was able to receive the help that the island people offered him. And even today, oftentimes we see people on the street corner, and sometimes, we'll say, I don't have $1, but you may not need $1. Maybe 25 cents will get them over what they need. You don't know. So it doesn't have to be a lot sometimes. It just have to be something small, given from your heart, and it still can be a blessing. The practical application, we must get beyond the idea that if a person is not of the same cloth as we, that they can't do anything for us or have nothing to offer. And this happens when we associate with certain people. Some people say, well, I don't associate with them. They're not of the same cloth, or they don't live in my neighborhood, so I don't have anything to do with them. But help can come from anywhere. Oftentimes when you least expect it. That person doesn't have to live in a mansion next door. He might live downtown on the street corner and might have to help you cross the street one day. So that blessing can come in various forms. So sometimes we have to stop and think, do I draw a conclusion now? Oftentimes when we see something happening, God will give you a clue if it's right or not. He will let you know. And so oftentimes it comes down to trusting before not trusting. The other thing is, it's about how much. It's not about how much we give, but how can we allow God to use us to help someone else. And I think this is probably one of the most important points in this lesson, because at the time that Paul was shipwrecked, he didn't have anything but himself. But because he was a man of God and had been commissioned to go out and carry out the ministry, he was given the powers to heal, the power to bring others to God. So this lesson allows us to say that sometimes we need to allow God to maybe allow us to help someone else, whether it be taking them to the store, taking them to the hospital, taking them to a doctor's appointment. That's being, God is using you for that, because sometimes it's a blessing. You know, we might get a little irritated sometimes, but it is a blessing to be able to help someone. Not always with money and not always with shelter, but just to do small favors. And so as the holiday season approaches, and maybe you are aware of someone struggling with asking or receiving help, we should ask God to work with us and help us to be a more gracious recipient. Because every time we do need help. Sometimes we don't realize. Sometimes it's just talking to someone or having a phone conversation with someone. I think this is where I'm a person. I don't particularly care for texting, but when you talk to someone, you can gather what's happening just through their voice or some of the things they say. In a text message, it's devoid of feeling, it's devoid of life. It's just a bunch of words. But when you're on the phone, you know you got somebody on that end and there's life on that end. And just to be able to have a conversation can be a blessing to someone, especially during the holiday season when a person may not be around their family or they may not have close friends that they can chat with. And we know that this is the season where people tend to be more gracious and more friendly. They should do it every day, but for some reason they do it at Christmas time. So this has been a very short lesson. And so as we leave our lesson, let's remember that a thank you or have a nice day may give someone hope or raise their spirits. It's just a small courtesy that can go a long way. You know, people nowadays, you know, men, some men will hold the door and somebody walk right through that door and won't say anything, won't say thank you or anything. That man didn't have to hold the door. That person, child, or whoever did it, didn't have to hold the door. He just could have let it go. So just a small thank you and a small courtesy can go a long way in raising a person's spirit. And there's nothing wrong with telling a person to have a nice day. And usually, when you're nice to someone, that favor usually come back to you, especially this time of the year. It might not come in the form that you expect it to come in, but just remember that. And like I said, this has been a good lesson in terms of ministering to others in spite of our own circumstances. You know, some people may not have a refrigerator full of food, but if you're hungry, they might go and get you a slice of bread. I mean, you just don't know. So let us, as we go out during the holiday season, let's think about someone else and remember that we can raise somebody's spirit during this holiday. And I'd like to say, to continue to listen to our Virtual Sunday School lesson. This unit has been a good unit. The book of Acts details Paul's journeys and some of the things that happened on his journeys. Paul had 4 journeys, and this was the one that deals with the shipwreck on a strange island. So as we remember this, just keep in mind that we too often need help. It might not come in the form that you think it should come in, but someone can always do you a favor. So on that note, I'm going to leave you, and I hope you have gotten something from our lesson today. Thank you.